Good afternoon. It's Friday the 19th of August 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we've got Vanessa Beeley joining us by video link from Damascus, as usual. So let's get straight on with economic news. And the report from the University of York is, as if it should come as a surprise to anybody, that more than half of UK households will be in fuel poverty by the new year, according to a new report that they have released. So this is a study co-authored by Jonathan Bradshaw of the Social Policy Research Unit at the University of York. And they're saying that, as we say, fuel poverty for 50% of the population in the new year. Of course, this is as a result of the continuing rises in the cap on fuel costs and so on, coming from Ofgem. So they're expecting 18 million families, 45 million people will struggle to make ends meet by then. So I think the BBC today was suggesting that prices would go up to about £3,600 annually for fuel costs, from whatever it is at the moment. The average is something around £1,400 a year. And I mean, this has got to have a massive impact on people, particularly if we look at this article from the BBC, the headlining it, growing share of under 30s pay unaffordable rent. And this is saying that people under 30 are facing growing cost of renting crisis. 4 in 10, so 40% in that age group, are now spending more than 30% of their pay on rent. And that's a 5-year high. But one thing that the BBC doesn't mention in this article, Patrick, is that in June this year, Property Mark released some statistics talking about the number of properties available to rent through agents, and that basically from 2019 to 2022, which is the same period that this BBC article is talking about, 94% of landlords who removed their properties from the rental market did so to sell them, because they're potentially in the position that the rents that they can command no longer, and with rising interest rates and so on, no longer cover the rental, the mortgage repayments. But basically they're saying that the number of properties available to rent has more or less halved in that time, from 2019 to 2022. So the cost of living crisis isn't just about inflation and the cost of in the sense of the cost of energy, but also the fact that availability of properties to rent is becoming quite a critical issue. I mean, we know in Plymouth, I know personally around a dozen people that are being evicted at the moment as a result of properties being sold out from under them. So this is clearly not a problem it's being fairly underreported. It's not a problem that's sort of restricted to the southeast of England by any means.
Well, when you restrict the supply of anything, what happens to the price? It normally goes up,
yes,
which is a perfect storm during an economic downturn. But the big problem here, Mike, is, well, what's the government's answer? What's their solutions for skyrocketing exorbitant energy costs, basically highway robbery for working class families? What's their answer? Have they come up with any solutions?
£400, I think, is the answer.
A £400 what, voucher for Christmas or something?
Well, people are getting it as cash if they're paying by direct debit, but if they're on a pay-as-you-go meter, then they're getting a voucher, yes.
And what's that going to do to inflation, printing up all that money?
But the point is that it's not going to even come close to dealing with the problem. It's really a gesture at best.
You'll end up paying over $1,500 in inflation over the year,
yes,
for what the government's printing up to give away a £400 voucher. That's the point. Printing up money and then giving vouchers is not a solution to out of control energy markets. It's just going to get worse. These governments and these ministers have no solutions at all.
Correct. Let's move on to health issues then. And well, we've got a 75-year anniversary.
75-year anniversary of the Nuremberg Code, not the Nuremberg trials themselves. That anniversary came and went last year, but the Nuremberg Codes, this is really important in the context of the pandemic, or the so-called global pandemic, and the massive vaccine rollout. So a few doctors and conscientious health professionals have put together an interesting video. There's also a number of events here that are happening. This is a World Health Council. There's a lot of things to commemorate this. So there's a lot of activity around this. We've got this video. You'll recognize some of the doctors and some of the personalities in here, from Doctors for COVID Ethics, for instance. Suchak Bhakti, and others. But I think it's worth listening to. And these points, although many of our viewers will have known many of these things already and understand them, it's still very important to reiterate and to put the whole global pandemic fiasco into context. But let's watch this.
It was almost 75 years ago, on August 19, 1947, that the city of Nuremberg was the place of an historic declaration.
When the judges of the military tribunal against the leading medical officers in the Nazi administration passed their verdict.
They issued what has become known as the Nuremberg Code since then. The court laid out 10 basic principles which must be observed to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. Informed consent and the right to opt out are two principles of the Nuremberg Code.
Today, when the entire world population is being made participants in a gigantic medical experiment of uncertain outcome, it is about time to commemorate the historic declaration that was issued to the world 75 years ago.
I invite you to come to Nuremberg or join us online on August the 20th, 2022, when I, together with other doctors, scientists, lawyers, and concerned citizens, will reiterate what, in the face of monstrous atrocities, the court issued that resounding condemnation of coercive, mandatory, and ill-informed, inhumane experiments.
The New England Journal of Medicine wrote in 1997, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary, "Informed consent, the core of the Nuremberg Code, has rightly been viewed as the protection of subjects' human rights."
The key contribution of Nuremberg was to merge Hippocratic ethics and the protection of human rights into a single code.
Now, mere 25 years later, it is about time that we, you and I, will assemble in Nuremberg to remind captured regulators and the general public of this important fact.
Where there is risk,
There must be a choice.
Informed consent and the right to opt are two principles of the Nuremberg Code. Today, the entire world population is being forced to.
Okay. Yeah, we had to cut it short because it was
Yeah.
quite long, but I think you get the idea. You
Yes.
can also find that video online. But it is the world's biggest medical experiment or pharmaceutical experiment,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
The big COVID-19 vaccine rollout. I think a lot of people are just happy to see it in the rearview mirror and don't want to talk and think too much about it now. They're just relieved that it seems to be over, but the fall and the winter are coming, Mike.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to have to face these issues all over again. Certainly, we'll talk about the monkeypox scare in a couple of minutes.
Indeed. Well, look, let's bring this back on screen. We had it on Wednesday's program. This was the latest all-cause mortality statistics from the Office for National Statistics. And I was making the point, once again, as we've been doing week after week in recent weeks, that we are experiencing in the UK deaths well above the 5-year average. This is an inflated 5-year average because it's now taking into account the peaks from the last 2 years. And so we've got significant excess mortality every week and no particular coverage in the mainstream press up until now. But today, in fact, the Telegraph has decided to jump on this, and it was, I believe, on the front page of the physical newspaper today.
This was, yes.
So, and the headline is "Lockdown Affects Feared to be Killing More People Than COVID." So that's quite a headline, bearing in mind, UK column, 21st Century Wire, others were talking about this right back in May 2020, that lockdown was going to do exactly this. So let's look at see what they're saying. Figures for excess deaths from the Office for National Statistics show that around 1,000 more people than usual are currently dying each week from conditions other than the virus. They say the Telegraph understands that the Department of Health has ordered an investigation into these figures amid concern that the deaths are linked to delays to and deferment of treatment from conditions such as cancers, diabetes, and heart disease. No mention, you'll note there, of any kind of investigation into the effect of vaccination programs on whether any of the excess mortality can be possibly linked to the rollout of various, the various boosters and so on. But the article goes on to say this: Dr. Charles Levinson, the chief executive of Dr. Call, a private GP service, said his company was seeing far too many cases of undetected cancers and cardiac problems, as well as disturbing numbers of mental health conditions. There's a quote from him, hundreds and hundreds of people are dying every week. What is going on? Delays in seeking and receiving healthcare are no doubt the driving force in my view. That's quite possible. The point is nobody knows. And I'm glad to see that the Telegraph is finally catching up with the UK column on this issue and covering it. But let's just put this in comparison to this article from the BBC this morning. Cornwall mother 90 in 40-hour wait for ambulance. Let's look at the quote here. A 90-year-old woman waited 40 hours for an ambulance to arrive after a serious fall. Stephen Sims said his mother from Cornwall fell on Sunday evening and was made a priority by NHS 111 at 11 p.m. on Monday. Ambulance arrived on Tuesday afternoon and she was in the vehicle for 20 hours at the Royal Cornwall Hospital before being admitted. So 40-hour wait for the ambulance to turn up, 20-hour wait in the ambulance itself for a 90-year-old woman. Patrick, whatever the cause of this excess mortality, the complete breakdown of the National Health Service is undoubtedly contributing to that.
Well, you know what the solution is, Mike? Stay at home and save the NHS.
Yes.
Wasn't that the rallying cry?
It was.
That was the rallying cry. I remember that.
So let's move on to California.
California, so this is a little bit of a legal victory here. This is important, certainly for freedom of worship, freedom of speech. California Church, which held services during COVID lockdowns, has just won a major court victory in California. However, they're still facing harassment from local government officials. So let's take a look at this decision. 6th District Court of Appeals reversed those rulings, and $200,000 in fines assessed against pastors and the church. And they're citing the U.S. Supreme Court decision from 2021 ruling that the ban on indoor worship imposed by California Gavin Newsom, the burgeoning authoritarian Democrat prospective candidate for the 2024 elections, this was in violation of the First Amendment. So this is being couched under the First Amendment. So this is going to have ramifications. We're talking about what would happen if there's another so-called pandemic.
Right.
Then decisions like this are going to be really crucial because they're going to provide the legal basis for the way the courts are going to be interpreting future similar problems like this. So this is huge. It has a potential also to go much further and much higher. And there's other cases like this that are currently being adjudicated, not just in California, but in multiple other states across the country. So, you know, we're going to see the legal backlash is just continuing, isn't it? After the craziness that we've all experienced over the last 2.5 years.
Okay, well, let's move on to monkeypox then.
Okay, here we go. You ready? So there he is. He's praying. What's he praying for, Mike? No doubt praying for a vaccine. And his prayers might be answered. So the monkeypox outbreak of 2022, it's going to go down in history as one of the greatest pseudo-pandemics in history. Let's just take a look at where things are in the U.S. Oh, well, his prayers have been answered. Mike, look at this. A deal's been struck to expedite the production of monkeypox vaccines in the U.S. The Denmark-based Bavarian Nordic will work with the local manufacturers in Michigan to package 2.5 million doses of the monkeypox vaccine in the U.S., which the U.S. has ordered in July. So the direct collusion between these pharmaceutical companies and governments. Who's paying for this, right? I mean,
well, if you remember right back at the very beginning, the British government placed an order with AstraZeneca for the AstraZeneca vaccine several months before it was even begun clinical trials. And so the question then was, if you remember, we asked the question, did that mean that AstraZeneca was going to get the shoe-in no matter the result of the clinical trials, or was the government just spending taxpayers' money? And if it failed the clinical trials, then they would those would be scrapped. But either way, AstraZeneca was the winner.
And also because of the international scarcity factor, all these countries were seen to be competing for these scarce doses at the beginning. You remember that?
Yeah.
So you have to get your order in early, even before it's even gone through any clinical trial. So again, this just stinks of the biggest scam and grift ever. So here's what's going on with monkeypox. Of course, they continue to target the gay community as the sort of source of this pandemic. U.S. is now offering extra monkeypox vaccines for gay pride events. Can you believe this? So again, and there's just very little, if any, scientific work being done to sort of validate or show any evidence that this is actually a genuine epidemic. It seems to be so far, Mike, relying on one thing. We'll show you what that thing is. I think you guys can figure out how they're doing their biosurveillance. But this one really took the biscuit here with the Daily Mail. Lucky they have a health section to keep us all informed. German monkeypox patient whose nose started to rot because of an undiagnosed HIV and syphilis left his immune system ravaged. This is a 40-year-old guy in Germany, shows up to his GP. Apparently, we'll show the picture because it was in the mail. And I warn viewers, this is quite disturbing, but here we go. It's the mail. So we're told this is the picture of this poor chap in Germany, 40 years old. But you know what? They don't really tell you what's going on in the context of this. And turns out, Mike, he was in pretty diabolical shape. How did they know he had monkeypox? Well, it helps to take a look at the actual medical report here. Thank you to Dr. Mark Beeley for supplying this to us. A 40-year-old male presented to his GP with a red spot on the tip of his nose, which they thought was a sunburn. And within 3 days, the nasal area progressed to necrosis. And MPXV, that's the new politically correct abbreviation for monkeypox. These lesions were confirmed by, ta-da, PCR test. So the PCR test to the rescue, and it spread to the rest of the body, etc. Infections in his groin area. I won't go into the gory details, but here's the important part. And they don't really make a big point of this. From a medical point of view, concomitant syphilis, advanced HIV infection. So this is what he had already. He had never had an STD test in his life, allegedly. So this guy was in appalling condition, Mike. And they're blaming this picture, the spectacle you see in the media, it's just monkeypox. So it's really incredible. This is like the worst gutter level of medical journalism, thanks to the Daily Mail. But the Daily Mail are gonna provide some nice takeaways for us. Look at this. So how do you know if you have monkeypox? Well, just look at the Daily Mail. They'll tell you, have you got a fever? You might have monkeypox. Have you got a headache? You might have monkeypox. How about muscle and back aches? That's monkeypox. Swollen lymph nodes, that happens quite a lot for a lot of different things. But you know what? You might have monkeypox. Chills, monkeypox. Exhaustion, monkeypox. Lesions, well, there's 100 different things you can have lesions and acne and pimples for. But according to the Mail, this means if you've got any of these symptoms, you very well may have monkeypox. So run to get your vaccination and do it quick because supplies are running out.
Yes.
So there you
So
go.
we got to be afraid, Patrick.
Well, yeah, but we'll put that back up on stage. We forgot that was the takeaway message here. Be afraid. That is the general takeaway point of this whole monkeypox farrago.
Yes.
And well,
yes. Okay. Well, look, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to join us there, and you'd be very much welcome, and that would be appreciated. Or you could pick something up at the UK column shop. Now, do please share any material you find on the various platforms as well. You notice the brand new tube is removed from that list at the moment. The website is down. They've had some technical issues. We might talk a little bit about that in extra. But now let's move on to Ukraine, Patrick. And what's the latest?
Up on screen here, we'll see this is the update for what's going on. This is Ukraine and NATO versus Russia, just to remind people it's not just Ukraine. We're also involved in that if you live in one of the G7 or Western countries. So this is quite possibly the most contentious and big story right now. We'll look at this. UN chief, he repeats call for military withdrawals from the Zaporizhia region. This houses Europe's largest nuclear power facility, multiple reactors. Antonio Guterres was in Lvov, or Lviv, depending on how you pronounce that, recently met with the great and powerful Vladimir Zelensky, and he warns that this is really dangerous. Now, Russia has been calling for the International Atomic Energy Agency to come and inspect it, because one of the things that Russia's concerned about is the different materials there that potentially could make a dirty bomb. That's one of the big aside from just general instability of the site, causing a meltdown or a Chernobyl type event, that there are dirty bomb materials there. And if these were to fall into the hands of radical nationalist or Azov battalion types, that would basically be beyond the pale as far as Russia's concerned. But let's just go back here. Military equipment and personnel should be withdrawn from the plant. Further deployment of forces or equipment on the side must be avoided. The area needs to be demilitarized. So this is Antonio Guterres, he's the Secretary General of the United Nations. And what he's asking for there is really to open the door for someone else to come and secure this facility. So this is the sort of, Trojan horse for a UN peacekeeping force or a Western force to be inserted into this conflict. And Russia is not having any of it. They're basically saying that, that means that it's basically going to be unguarded. And if we're not guarding it and we know how to secure it, sending in any sort of other or demilitarizing it's just totally out of the question. So this is where the contention is right now. And then over on, this is RT, which is deemed by the UK government to be a Russian disinformation outlet. Here's what they're saying. Ukrainian forces are shelling the city near the plant here. This is a local official, Vladimir Rogov. He's saying that 7 shells hit the Russian-controlled city that hosts the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, largest such facility in Europe. So both sides are accusing each other. And so the Western media, of course, is going to either A, play it neutral, which the New York Times tried to do this morning, which you give them a little bit of credit for, but they're going to lean in favor of Kiev and lean in favor of Zelensky. So in terms of that controversy, that could be potentially a big problem if something was to kick off. So a lot of people are rightly hoping that it calms down and that site's secured. But here, this is what's happening on the political front. Europe is basically saying no military aid in July, the data shows, for Zelensky. So they're slowing down on their sort of aid.
Now, is that because they're losing faith, or is that because they're actually running out of what they have to give?
I think it's probably the latter. Firstly, is costing a lot. This is no longer a election victory platform point for any European leader. People are just getting tired of this conflict. They're facing austerity at home, skyrocketing fuel prices as a result of sanctions. The penny's slowly dropping for the average person, the public. Even someone who's not politically minded will be able to work out and put 2 and 2 together eventually. But this is just not good news for this guy here. So is this possible that we could be going from hero, he was hero, to zero and going very quickly? Well, let's take a look at the paper of record, the deep state's in-house newsletter in Washington, D.C. That's the Washington Post. Zelensky faces outpouring of criticism from his own people, according to the Post, over failure to warn his people of an impending war. So this is an interesting twist to this story. So when the Washington Post runs a story like this, you know that the White House is backing off a little bit, or they're trying to create a space where they can insert something in between them and their support for Ukraine. So the argument they're making here is interesting. They're saying that Zelensky's saying, well, we didn't want to panic because the economy was losing $7 billion a month. So therefore, the intelligence wasn't certain, so we weren't sure. And they're saying, no, the U.S. intelligence and CIA said it was certain. Why didn't you listen to the CIA? So this is sort of the same thing they'd attack Trump for not listening to the intelligence services. Zelensky's making this argument of economy, and they're trying to conflate this. Joaquin Flores has a great channel on Telegram, said this morning. They're trying to make this similar argument, a moral argument, of lives versus economy. The same type of argument is made with lockdown and COVID. So you can see how these things are being framed right now. So what the next thing here is that he will be blamed for losing the war. Okay, and so if that happens, and that could eventually happen, you'll see this president basically going from hero to zero and maybe leaving on a plane out of his country to Switzerland or something. But let's look at this image here. This is from Getty. And this is interesting. This really just tells you everything you need to know. All these leaders coming to visit him. He's still wearing the green t-shirt. He's got the military thug flanking him on the right. And then the guy in the sort of shirt tuck, Benetton look on the left. I mean, the whole thing is media theater. They're trying to portray this image of Ukraine as this kind of westernized, middle class, sort of Silicon Valley, slightly woke culture sort of that they're forming here, and they're hoping that Western people are going to eat this up and then basically tell the governments, give this guy a lot of support, more arms, more money. And the whole thing is wearing really thin, Mike. And I don't think that this stage show is not going to survive the U.S. midterms, I predict.
So we bring Vanessa onto the program at this point. Welcome to the program, Vanessa. And well, let's talk about if governments aren't providing the weapons, is there any other source?
Yeah, well, it's interesting segue from what Patrick just mentioned. And in fact, the article that I'm citing from here is from the Washington Post. So clearly here they are inserting the replacement for direct funding from US and EU and UK governments. So this is a video that's been put out by an agency or a company called signmyrocket.com. I think it's fairly self-explanatory when you read what's on the rocket. So basically, this is an organization that is encouraging people to donate to the Ukrainian forces, and the more they pay, the larger the missile that their message will be written on, I presume in indelible ink, and that will be then fired at the Russian forces. Now, on their front page, you'll notice if you come down the familiar language, you have a chance to kill all. So that tells us immediately what kind of tone is being set by all of these kind of organizations that have been established as part of this crowdfunding industry, which is, according to George Eliasson, who's an independent journalist who's been in the Donbass since before 2014, this has actually been going on since 2014, but of course it's gathered momentum in the last few months since February. So if we go on to the next slide, this is taken from the Washington Post article. So the most prominent crowdfunding group, although I would slightly disagree, but obviously it's the Washington Post, we can't expect them to be accurate. Sign My Rocket started by selling messages on Soviet-made 82mm caliber mortar rounds for $30 each. But eventually, co-founder Anton Sokolenko realized that if it sold messages on more powerful weapons, benefactors from the United States, Britain, Germany, Canada, Switzerland, and elsewhere would pay even more. We got bigger and bigger shells, Sokolenko said in an interview from his home in Cherkasy, a city in central Ukraine. 95% of the orders are in English, and most are from the United States. I would say that in most of the websites, the UK is a close second. So how it works, here you have instructions exactly what to do, but if you look on the right-hand side, signmyrocket.com, the total price for putting your message on the side of a T-72 tank turret, for example, $3,000. Now, what I do have to say, and this was made clear in the Washington Post article, this is going under the legal radar. The military top brass are not sanctioning or endorsing this, but they're turning a blind eye. So effectively, this is not legal tender, if you like. This is the crowdfunding industry. We saw it before in Syria with the white helmets, for example, raising millions in public funds with no transparency and no accountability. And this is exactly what is happening through these organizations.
Vanessa, can I ask you, do you think it's possible that none of these, eventually none of these shells will actually make it to the front line, that this could be just a giant money-making scam?
That's also what I was going to add, Patrick. Exactly. This is very possibly a sort of a massive money laundering operation. And as I said, there is no transparency. There's no accountability. Most of these organizations are taking public money and dispensing it without any accountability at all. And also something that we thought about also effectively, what's happening here, the government is passing liability, just as they did in Syria through the white helmets, they're passing liability onto the public for effectively sponsoring war crimes and crimes against humanity. So not only the donors and the sponsors, but also the organizations, the middlemen that are effectively gathering public money to send into Ukraine. And as you said, we don't know There is absolutely no proof that it's going and to what it's claiming to do. So here you have an idea of different prices depending on the size of the missile. Sorry, having a coughing fit. And the next slide, you'll see one of the actual rockets with one of the, let's say, less controversial messages.
Yeah, it's still pretty
Yeah.
unpleasant. Putin, say hello to my little friend.
And I have to say that this is, as I said, this is relatively mild. Many of the photos that they're publishing online are far more incendiary, to use the pun, than this. So again, this is from the Sign My Rocket Twitter account. Again, we have the language "kill orcs" with a personal text. I mean, this is the fact that this is being allowed on Twitter is extraordinary, but of course, it's not extraordinary.
Yeah, explain to people what "kill orcs" means. I mean, it's obviously a reference to Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah.
So who are the orcs?
Well, I mean, the orcs are the monsters from Mordor. You know, the inhuman beasts that were unleashed on humanity. So it's very clear what they are saying, and this dehumanization of Russian forces and Russian people has been ongoing since 2014. So here it says quite clearly, again from the Washington Post article, Sokolenko's organization has moved beyond mortar shells and is selling inscriptions on anti-tank mines, bomb-laden drones, VOG-17 hand grenades, etc., etc. He claims that the company has raised more than 150,000 for the Ukrainian military. Again, I do have to point out that the Ukrainian military is not actually officially endorsing these operations. Now, the next website that I want to look at, and this one is really particularly unpleasant, again taken from this article, the website Revenge4, launched 3 weeks ago by a Kiev native and IT worker, Nazar Gulik. So basically, what their tagline is, revenge for Russia is a country that deserves the revenge of the whole world. What's your reason for wishing to take revenge? Ruined human lives and crushed dreams, decades of occupation and gunned down revolutions, man-made famine and global artificial disasters. Help Ukrainian soldiers, punish Russia for everything. I mean, this is just extraordinary hate-filled messaging. And guys, let's turn that back on the US empire, the UK empire, and the EU empires that have been doing that for centuries. So according to the same website, Russia is fueling conflicts worldwide. I would disagree. I would say the United States and its allies is doing so, destabilizing the situation in various regions. This affects overall stability, disrupts supply chains, leading to economic crises, famine, and ruin lives of ordinary people. Incredible projection here. Ukraine believes in diplomacy as the only way to resolve conflict. That's why they never followed through on the Minsk agreements. However, Russia thinks differently and understands only the position of power. We are ready to defend ourselves in any way possible. Then they basically mention the money that is raised, 52,000. But then we come on to yet another one of these organizations, Drones for Ukraine Fund. Now, this is one, Patrick, which I think definitely feeds into what you were talking about, because what they are claiming is that they claim on their website they've raised $1 million, and they've done this through creating key fobs out of the skin of Russian warplanes or helicopters, attack helicopters that have allegedly been brought down. So again, I would raise the question, where is the proof that these key fobs are being made from these materials? Move on, Mike, you'll get a picture of it.
Yep. So there you go.
Okay, so yeah, so effectively, I mean, this is absolute crime scam territory here. They go on then to the next slide. They claim, as they said, that they've raised 1 million. And let's have a look at things that they've actually supplied. So order tells you 15 million how many donated, and then more than 200,000 raised for charges. But where are these drones going? Well, if you go to the website, which is seemingly connected to Drones for Ukraine, you'll find that in amongst the groups that it's going to is, guess what, the Nazi Azov Special Forces. And most of these legions or battalions or brigades or divisions are either legion or related to various Nazi linked brigades. So here you have the Azov battalion thanking the public for sending them the drone. Short video.
Thanks everyone who donated to Drones for Ukraine Foundation from Special Operation Forces Azov Kyiv.
Дякуємо усім, хто донатив на Drones for Ukraine від ССО Азов Київ.
Here's another one also sending drones in. But, this is called the project, but I come back to the fact this brigade. So those donors, those sponsors, and the organizations that are allegedly facilitating the supply of drones to Nazi war crime committing, crimes against humanity committing groups are liable for prosecution, right? And here you have Mikhailo Fedorov, Vice PM and Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, talking about, if we go to the next slide, the crypto fund. Now, who else raised money through Bitcoin, through cryptocurrency? Of course, ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. So we're seeing a very interesting pattern come through here. The crypto fund of Ukraine raised 50 million. Okay, moving on. He already then talks about the fact that they've purchased through donations from US public, is handed to armed forces of Ukraine to buy their first, I can't read that, Mike, can you read it for me, sorry?
Yeah, so it says the first helicopter purchased by donations is handed to armed forces of Ukraine. The Mi-2 AM-1 is modernized with advanced medical equipment to save lives of both injured military and civilians. Thanks to people from 110 countries for joining the fundraising.
Right. So again, I come back to the fact that these donors, these sponsors, and these organizations are liable if it is found that the Ukrainian forces and the Azov battalions are found guilty of war crimes. This is an article from Time in February or March 2022. Ukraine has already spent $1 million of the donations it cryptocurrencies on military supplies, including bullets that were delivered Friday. The Ukrainian government anticipates doubling the 50 million of crypto donated so far in the next 2 or 3 days. Most of the donations have been in Bitcoin and Ether. The 250-person ministry has managed to find suppliers in Europe and the US for everything from the vest to food packages, bandages, and night vision devices for the army, and about 10% of the suppliers take crypto. So, as I said, where did we see the use of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin previously? In Syria for the terrorist groups enabled by the United States, the UK, and the EU. So, we're seeing, I think, exactly what Patrick said. We're seeing now the withdrawal of the direct support from NATO member states and the replacement with these third-party agencies, outreach agencies that give the governments plausible deniability. I'd like to know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely another way to kind of privatize or launder support, ongoing support. But, this is just all a drop in the bucket. The U.S. just dumped $5 billion into their coffers this month. And there's more and more resistance to this. So I think this is more about generating that ongoing public political kind of support.
Well, not only that, it's also directly involving the public in the conflict.
Yeah.
Much more, because much more than just having taxpayer money spent on it. This is actually people giving their own money, so they've taken an active role in the thing themselves. They're invested in it.
They're invested in it. And so my question is, if you're writing messages on these shells, or these drones. I mean, the Polish guys did a crowdfund for a Bactaret Turkish drone is 3.4 million euros, and it got shot down like the first week they put it up. So what happens? Do you get a refund if you pay for a message and the Russians blow up the ammo dump on the Ukrainian side? I mean, what are they offering in terms of refunds there? I mean, so what I just want to say, when the first Gulf War, the United States, and I remember this vividly, a student from my university wrote on the side of the bomb of an F-16 to Saddam from Cal Poly. I went to Cal Poly for my bachelor's degree. And when I saw that, even at that young age, I was only 20, and I realized that this is something very wrong with this. I don't want to bomb anybody. Thank you very much. I mean, who are you speaking on behalf of? But that was a thing that I remember vividly at the time in the first Gulf War. This is the same sort of thing going on here. A lot of people are not going to buy this, Mike. There's a certain amount of people that will buy it and will support it, but a lot of people are going to say this is just perverted. And I think there's a lot more reasonable people out there than we realize.
Yes. Okay. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Vanessa was reporting on the bombing of the dedication ceremony for the church. She's going to talk a bit more about this in a second, but I just wanted to bring Baroness Cox on screen because she's written to Liz Truss a week or so ago. So this is to the Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss MP. Let's just have a look and see what Baroness Cox said. She said, "Dear Liz, it's reported that jihadis in northern Syria recently attacked a ceremony marking the consecration of a new Orthodox church. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of the town. Vanessa will remind us in a second. 2 people were killed and over a dozen injured. The absence of any statement from the British government is a serious cause for concern, especially amongst the local Christian population who already fear that the UK is indifferent to their suffering. I and many colleagues have raised similar urgent concerns about the plight of religious minorities throughout the war in Syria to no avail. I would therefore be very reassured by your commitment to a public statement condemning the recent attack in the strongest terms and expressing support for Christians across Syria. It's essential that the UK shines a light on perpetrators of this unprovoked and premeditated attack against innocent people. The freedom to believe, to pray, and commit acts of worship is a fundamental human freedom." So that's Baroness Cox. Vanessa, and well, I'm not aware that Liz Truss made any comment about this. I think the response to that was more silence.
Well, no, it wasn't silence, Mike. Of course, it was to sanction the leaders of the national defense groups in both of these Christian towns, to sanction them for their solidarity with Russia, effectively, when Russia has defended the Christian communities alongside Hezbollah, of course, in the region, while the UK, while fanfaring their support of Christian minorities in the Middle East, have effectively funded and sponsored and equipped and armed the groups that have ensured their cleansing. I mean, it's just criminal, abject hypocrisy. Unbelievable. Of course, she's not going to make a statement.
How can they be on the wrong side of history to that degree? I mean, what side of history does the UK government think that they're on in Syria, especially on this particular instance? Like, what do they benefit from sanctioning local Christian militias that are defending their own towns against foreign-backed jihadists? I mean, what do they hope to gain?
Well, it all depends who writes the history at the end of the day. We've got to make sure that the right people write the history.
Yeah.
So that they don't gain anything.
I don't think those textbooks are going to sell very well in 20 years' time,
well,
unfortunately.
Indeed. Okay, let's move on to online safety. Sort of related in some respects. So here's Sky News this morning and republished by quite a number of outlets. Online safety bill campaigners join forces to urge next Prime Minister to prioritise new legislation. And they're saying a group of campaigners, survivors and families affected by abuse on social media have written to the Tory leadership candidates to urge the next Prime Minister to prioritise the online safety bill. Danielle Armitage is one of those to have signed the open letter addressed to the candidates. She was only 14 years old when she was groomed while playing an online interactive game for children. The man claimed to be 16 years old. However, he in fact was in his late 40s at the time. Campaigners are calling on Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to resist calls to water down the planned internet safety laws and commit to delivering them without delay. Now, of course, Patrick, the thing here is that what that man was doing was illegal already. There's no requirement for additional legislation to deal with that. Grooming of children is already illegal. So the question is, what is the online safety bill all about? Well, we have been talking about this for, I think, since 2017, when the first hints of this were being released, and we were saying very much it was about controlling narratives and dealing with what the government calls disinformation. Well, more and more outlets starting to also raise the alarm on this and really reiterating what we've been talking about for a long time. But this is Jonathan Sumption this time speaking. We're writing in The Spectator, the hidden harms in the online safety bill. And what does he have to say? Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, says that it's all about protecting children and vulnerable adults. She claims it does nothing to limit free speech. Technically, she's right. Her bill does not directly censor the internet. It instead seeks to impose on media companies an opaque and intrusive culture of self-censorship, which will have exactly the same effect. He goes on to say, the real vice of the bill is that its provisions are not limited to material capable of being defined and identified. It creates a new category of speech which is legal but harmful. The range of material covered is almost infinite, the only limitation being that it must be liable to cause harm in some people. Unfortunately, that's not much of a limitation. Harm is defined in the bill in circular language of stratospheric vagueness. It means any physical or psychological harm. As if that were not general enough, harm also extends to anything that may increase the likelihood of someone acting in a way that is harmful to themselves, either because they've encountered it on the internet or because someone has told them. So I'm glad to see Jonathan Sumption speaking out on this. I think it's important that more and more people speak out on this, but there's certainly the debate is lifting, and because as we get closer to the point where it actually starts to be debated in Parliament, there's more and more debate in the media.
His words are very sobering.
Yes.
They're very sobering. I haven't seen it put in that clear terms by anybody yet. So I hope that that's going to provide a tool for other people to speak out on this.
Yes. Now, in the meantime, Ofcom continues with its call for evidence for the first phase of online safety regulation. I recommend that everybody goes and has a look at this document. We originally, when they released it, which I think was in June this year, we reported on it then. But if you didn't see it then, go, or you need to remind yourself of the contents, please do. It lists a range of questions and asks for people to respond to them. There's no requirement to respond to all the questions. But if we just put that back on screen, I'm mentioning it again now because we're rapidly running out of time, and Ofcom has just announced that this is going to be the closing date for this, the 13th of September 2022. So only a few weeks to go on this if anybody wants to get involved. And I strongly suggest that people should be.
If you have any strong views on this, it's highly encouraged that you go and visit this and take this opportunity to make your views known, and hopefully this will make a difference.
Yes, indeed. But if we come back to the Sky article for a second, underneath the sort of the main image that they put at the top of this article, they had this why you can trust Sky News, and there's a little T logo there, as you can see on the just below it. And when you click on that link, it takes you to this page on the Sky News website entitled "The Trust Project." And do you see what's on the ticker tape on the underneath the virtual studio there, Patrick? Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury. This is the item that they've chosen for their graphic, right? So the question is, I just wanted to take the opportunity to remind everybody what the Trust Project is. And if you want to know how we got to this point, if you look on the UK Column website on the section entitled Censored, it's just ukcolumn.org/censored. We have a timeline on there that shows the events that led up to the publication of the Online Harms White Paper, which eventually led to the Online Safety Bill. And so in, November 2017, the Mercola Centre for Applied Ethics established the Trust Project. So this was all about how did they describe it? A consortium, of top news organizations getting together to establish trust. No, I think we'll find that the correct terminology for that is cartel. We've seen, Patrick, over the last number of years, how the mainstream media launders information between the various components of the cartel, and it really is a cartel now.
Yeah, and this is just another little sort of device that they've fashioned out to sort of give legitimacy to what's effectively corporate propaganda. They're talking about, trust indicators.
Right.
Let's look into this journalist's background. Are they trustworthy? Let's look at the ethics and the fairness of this publication. I mean, the stuff, the tripe that's put out in the Guardian, in the Times, the Mail. Don't even talk about the tabloids. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The stuff that's put out on a daily basis, it just beggars belief that any of these people could put anything like a trust badge on their news outlets. But that's exactly what they're attempting to do. So that's the in group, isn't it? That's the club.
That's the club.
If you get a badge, you're in the club. If you're not, you're out.
100%. And when we look at the online safety bill and how that's going to operate, journalistic content is protected, but only if you've got that badge. Only if you've got that badge.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this, these are publications that reserve resources and deploy journalists and researchers to do attack pieces on members of the public and academics and journalists.
And Vanessa.
And journalists like Vanessa and many others.
Yes.
Some of whom we'll see, they'll be speaking at the Beautiful Days Festival. David Miller, Piers Robinson, Tim Hayward, all these people have been politically targeted by these same papers with their trust badges and careers ruined. Why? Because they hold views that slightly veer off of what is the so-called consensus reality. So, what side do you want to be on that argument? I'll tell you, I'm with the truth every time, and I have no idea what the mainstream media is up to when it comes to the truth. I really don't know. Well,
indeed. Well Press Gazette, we could have chosen others. GB News secures £60 million from investment amid Warner Brothers Discovery buyout. So basically, they've got a second round of funding. I believe that matches what they had in their first round of funding. The Warner Brothers Discovery their shares have been bought out by Legatum Ventures Limited and Sir Paul Marshall, the hedge fund manager. So the co-founders, that's Andrew Cole and Mark Schneider, they've resigned as directors. Schneider's going to remain on the editorial committee, but that £60 million is going to bring some new voices on there, some of whom might be good, some of whom may not be. Michael Portillo is one that's being touted as being a new face for GB News.
Oh, is this nice? A major BBC pundit going over to GB News. So what is this at the end of the day? What do you think is going on here? Does this look like a hostile takeover through the back corporate door?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see whether editorial policy changes over the next period. Obviously, they have taken, at least some of their people have taken a very useful line on certain topics like vaccination, adverse reactions, and so on. So we'll see whether that continues.
So Mark Stein, how long will Mark Stein survive with this new look GB News? Who knows? They might cycle him out. That'll be a litmus test.
It will be.
Will Mark Stein remain on that network? And Neil Oliver, there's a few others too. How long will they survive? Are they going to give it a complete makeover and turn it into sort of an edgy version of ITV? That's the big question. So we'll see.
Yeah, indeed. Now, we haven't commented yet on the Alex Jones situation.
Yeah, well, again, online harms, online safety, free speech. So this is kind of an important story. And this headline sums it up. Love him or hate him, the war on Alex Jones is a war against all of us. And this is on Revolver, excellent news site in America. So Alex Jones is being dragged through the courts in America. They did this huge settlement. I don't know, it was how many million?
48 million or so in total at the end.
48 million for supposedly upsetting the families of the victims of Sandy Hook. Okay. Now, he's not going to have to pay that out, of course, because maximum damages per plaintiff in the state of Texas will be about $750,000. So there's about 5.6 million in total. That's all. Plus, he's, I think, put InfoWars or the parent company into bankruptcy. They'll start a new vehicle. So that's all manageable from that side. But from a business side, he'll just keep going. But on this side, what does this mean for free speech? Because the First Amendment is inviolable. If you upset somebody, no matter what you say, as long as it's not a fire in a crowded theater, as long as it's not incitement of actual violence, legally that's protected speech. So this type of court decision has basically opened the door for, and not unlike the online harms bill, Mike,
right,
just wildly vague And, it might psychologically damage somebody. I mean, what's this going to do to speech in general? So this is why, love him or hate him, Alex Jones is now on the front line. He is the poster child of free speech in the United States. And I don't think a lot of people realize this yet. But if you think this is okay just because it happened to Alex Jones, that he's been targeted, the judges are becoming more political. And I'll throw this out just finally. Do you think if Alex Jones was a Democrat Party supporter and that he was campaigning for Hillary Clinton and he got caught in this same Sandy Hook controversy, do you think he would get dragged through the courts and the judges would rule against him in such an incredible fashion?
I suspect not. This is Trump.
A lot of these legal actions came after Donald Trump's campaign, and Alex Jones campaigned for Donald Trump and arguably brought a whole lot of voters to the Trump camp, okay? So that's not a coincidence. So again, this is political. And what we're seeing now, and what we'll show you with the FBI right now, hugely political. Judges are hugely political. They're taking people down based on their political beliefs or affiliations. That is America today. So Alex Jones is definitely, I think, caught up partly in that the political just makes it convenient for them to go after free speech and freedom of the press.
Yes.
So there we are.
Okay, so let's move on to climate then. And well, there is no climate emergency, according to the Global Climate Intelligence Group. And they've published or updated their declaration. It now has, I think, 1,104 signatories on this. And they're saying climate science should be less political, while climate policy should be more scientific. Scientists should openly address uncertainties and exaggerations in their predictions of global warming, while politicians should dispassionately count the real costs as well as the imagined benefits of their policy measures. And the parallels with COVID policy here, Patrick, of course. But let's put this back on screen and run through a few of the comments that they make. They say that natural as well as anthropogenic factors cause warming. And you can read the main context of this. They're saying warming is far slower than predicted. They're saying climate policy relies on inadequate models, just like COVID. They're saying CO2 is plant food, the basis of all life on Earth. And they're saying that global warming has not increased natural disasters. Climate policy must respect scientific and economic realities. And finally, they say our advice to the European leaders is that science should strive for a significantly better understanding of the climate system, while politics should focus on minimizing potential climate damage by prioritizing adaptation strategies based on proven and affordable technologies. So that's the position they're taking, and quite a number of people from the scientific community, including Nobel laureates, that have signed on to this.
The lead signatory is, in fact, a Nobel laureate. So, yeah, definitely check out that website and read what they have to say. These are things that have been out there for a while, but it's nice to see it brought together and packaged in such a good way. But so if you want to go further on this particular topic, go to 21st Century Wire. This is the lead story right now by French journalist Freddie Ponton. One Health. This is the sort of the globalist UN Sustainable Development banner going forward for climate, for viruses, and for food security. And this is the third part of his series, Food Security and the Catalyst for Manufactured Emergencies. And climate change is absolutely central in this argument that we need to secure global food supplies. So we need to advance policies that are climate friendly, like net zero carbon and all this, to secure the world's food supplies to avert a food security disaster. And they're also putting COVID in there. Zoonotic diseases could threaten the food supply, etc. And so all the things that we had, supply chains disruptions, lockdowns, all that's being blamed on COVID. So then that instead of policy being blamed, it's all about, no, it's the virus or it's climate change. And it has nothing to do with government, just economic suicidal and dysfunctional government policies. So he breaks this down really well in this. It's quite a lengthy piece, but in terms of research, I can say that the research done here and in the other two articles on One Health are second to none. That is the framework going forward for the next decade that they're trying to basically run to couch all these things under the One Health approach. So food security is the other part of that. And you're seeing that the Dutch farmers controversy
Yes.
and the protests there. That's central. That's mentioned in this article as well.
Right, Dutch farmers, German farmers now as well as we're reporting, and in fact Serbian farmers as well. So this is spreading right across Europe. But Patrick, let's move on then back to the US and the US elections.
So the midterms are coming up, and this is really a forerunner to the 2024 elections. Donald Trump, of course, had his home raided in Mar-a-Lago. That's being fleshed out right now in the media and the courts. But the U.S. media is just, I mean, the Washington Post, I have to say this, you know, I look at the Washington Post daily and I am searching for news stories on their front page and I can't find any. All you find is political articles about January 6th. This one was leading today, this morning, Trump's personality cult and the erosion of U.S. democracy. So it's all about how the GOP is getting radicalized by Trump. Meanwhile, if you look at the polls, Donald Trump's doing incredibly well in the polls, better than Joe Biden, in fact. So the media, or the Bezos Post, the New York Times, all these people, they're geared in a political way to sort of shape the political conversation. And they're not doing any journalism at all. You cannot find very many actual news stories that are interesting on the front of the Washington Post every day. So go and try it for yourself. I'm struggling badly. But here's the big story, and this is not getting coverage, but eventually it will. And back to Revolver here, Darren Beatty's website. Release the tape. The Revolver has definitive proof of FBI's hiding critical footage of the January 6th pipe bomber. Now, when the January 6th controversy happened, you watched the news, there were reports of pipe bombs on site. And all of a sudden, that went quiet. Nobody talked about it. So right now, there's evidence of footage, but this footage is not being requested by the vaunted January 6th committee being run by Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, and the others. So why do they not want to see the video of a pipe bomber, alleged pipe bomber, that targeted the DNC headquarters on January 6th? You'd think that would be the first thing they would want. They don't want to see it. They don't want to know about it. Everyone wants to bury it. What does that mean? What could it possibly mean? I mean, could it be, pray tell, that this pipe bomber was an FBI informant, or he's being handled by an FBI informant? I mean, that's the obvious question that everybody's asking. This is basically what Darren Beatty's saying in this amazing Revolver article. Here's Darren Beatty. We have a short video clip with Tucker Carlson just from 2 days ago, but let's listen to what he has to say.
So will you explain to us, for those who may have been confused by the tape, which was that we just played, that was evocative, raised questions. What do you think what is going on here? What does this add up to?
Well, first, what it definitively shows, this piece at revolver.news available right now, shows definitively and without question that the FBI is withholding, hiding, concealing from the public critical footage of the pipe bomber actually planting the bomb, actually placing the bomb down. And the question is, why would they do that? Why would they hide precisely the piece of footage that would be most likely to help them get the public to catch and identify the perpetrator? And furthermore, given that we know that they're hiding this footage and that the bomb was placed outside of the Democrat National Committee building, allegedly by some MAGA Trump supporter January 6th pipe bomber, why aren't Democrats demanding to Merrick Garland, to Stephen D'Antuono, to Christopher Wray, that they release this piece of critical footage?
What do you think the answer? I mean, that is so bizarre. I mean, they're constantly telling you that right-wing extremists are the great terror threat that we face. So here you have a case where somebody actually did put a pipe bomb outside the DNC, and they don't seem interested in finding out who it was? That does not make sense at all.
It doesn't make sense at all. And look, if people read the full piece at Revolver News, you'll see that this is just one of many absolutely mind-blowing coincidences related to the pipe bomb situation. Keep in mind, we know this pipe bomb that was allegedly planted the evening before wasn't discovered until after the RNC pipe bomb was discovered at 12:40. That means there was an entire morning of people walking by, of pedestrians, of motorists, of DNC security who didn't see it, and even the Secret Service itself, which we know by reports swept the area, checked entrances. The pipe bomb was placed just feet away from an exit to the DNC building, and the Secret Service missed it. And they missed it so that the actual pipe bomb would first be discovered at the RNC, discovered at 12:40. And so when it was...
So how does that sound? Does it sound plausible?
It sounds like a setup.
Yeah. So that's the January 6th committee in a nutshell.
Yes.
The insurrection. There's a lot of people that believe the FBI was actively involved in that. There were informants active, people, agent provocateurs. This has all been questioned publicly. The press is ignoring it. Now, this story is going to be very difficult to ignore, but they'll still try to ignore it. So this tells you we have a very skewed and very politicized and very corrupt justice system and political atmosphere right now in America. Extremely worrying.
Yes. Okay. Right. Well, let's end on some good news, Patrick. And very, very briefly, we can't continue to dig into a hole. And 9/11 Tribute Museum in New York closes permanently.
Well, good news or bad news, depending on who you ask here. But so here's the 9/11 Tribute Museum in New York City. They're running out of cash. They're blaming COVID. And basically, 2/3 of their revenue comes from people visiting. But nobody wants to visit. And even after lockdown's been raised, nobody's coming to watch it. So the interest in the 9/11 memorial has basically evaporated. So they're having to shut down. Can you imagine that? A 9/11, they can't even subsidize a 9/11 museum. Of all the things, the money they threw at COVID, they can't subsidize it, but yet they're blaming COVID for its closure. I mean, really unbelievable. Just take a little piece of the PPE budget for City Hall in New York City. That would fund that museum probably for about 10 years.
Yes.
But anyway, hey, we're not in charge of the budget.
No, indeed. Okay, well, we got to leave it there. Thank you very much to Vanessa and Patrick for joining us today. We'll be back in a few minutes on the main live stream for a little bit of extra. Other than that, we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.